I found out that my mother is secretly draining my $10 million trust fund and using it for her extravagant lifestyle with her boyfriend. So I went to their beach house and told them that I am taking everything back. My mother called me yesterday, asking why I hadn't visited her new beach house yet. I was too busy working 3 jobs to pay off my student loans. When my father died 4 years ago, I was 19 and just starting college. My mother, Helen, sat me down the day after the funeral and explained that Dad hadn't been as successful as we thought. The business was in debt. The house was mortgaged to the limit, and there was nothing left for me. She said she'd have to sell everything just to break even. I believed her because why wouldn't I? She was my mother. She cried with me about how Dad had hidden the financial problems from both of us. 2 months later, she started dating Roger, a real estate developer she met at her yoga class. She moved in with him after 6 months. I was living in a cramped studio apartment near campus, working at a coffee shop every morning, tutoring in the afternoons, and stocking shelves at a grocery store on weekends. Meanwhile, Helen's Instagram showed her and Roger on trips to Cabo, Aspen, and buying matching Teslas. When I asked how she could afford all this, she said Roger was generous and wanted to spoil her after everything she'd been through. She'd sometimes offer me $100 here and there, saying she wished she could do more, but Roger controlled the finances. I never asked for more. I was too proud, and honestly, I thought I was building character by struggling through college on my own. Last week, I was cleaning out my closet and found an old tablet of my father's. It had been dead for years, but I'd just gotten a compatible charger from a friend. When it powered on, his email automatically synced. There were hundreds of messages from his lawyer that I'd never seen. The most recent one, sent 2 days before he died, had a subject line that made my stomach drop. Final review of Grace's trust documents. I opened it. My father had left me everything. Not just everything, but everything was protected in an irrevocable trust that my mother couldn't touch. The business that she said was failing, sold for $8 million 3 months after he died. The house she claimed was mortgaged, paid off completely and worth another $2 million. There were investment accounts, bonds, and even a college fund specifically set aside that would have covered my entire education plus living expenses. The trust clearly stated that Helen was to be the administrator until I turned 21. Then everything transferred to me. I turned 23 last month. The lawyer's emails showed he'd been trying to contact me for 2 years. Every email bounced because Helen had changed my contact information in his files to her own dummy accounts. I drove to her beach house that Roger supposedly bought, knocked on the door at 8 in the morning. Roger answered in a bathrobe, looking irritated. Grace? Helen's in the shower. I pushed past him into their marble kitchen. I need to talk to both of you. Helen came down 15 minutes later in designer loungewear I recognized from her shopping posts. Sweetheart, what a surprise. Is everything okay? I pulled out the tablet and set it on their granite counter. Found Dad's old tablet. Interesting emails on here. Her face went completely still. Roger looked confused. What emails? I turned to him. The ones about the $10 million trust fund my father left me. The one Helen's been stealing from for 4 years. Roger's coffee mug stopped halfway to his mouth. What trust fund? Helen started talking fast. Grace, you don't understand the full situation. There were debts, taxes, and administrative costs. I pulled up another email on the tablet. The one where the lawyer explicitly states all debts and taxes were paid from Dad's life insurance, and the trust was protected from any claims. Roger set down his mug very slowly. Helen, what is she talking about? I kept going. Here's the interesting part, Roger. This beach house? It's in my name. She bought it with my money. Your matching Teslas? Paid for from my investment accounts. That development project you've been bragging about at the country club? The initial investment came from my trust. Roger's face was turning purple. You told me that was your divorce settlement. Helen tried to reach for him. Roger, please let me explain. He stepped back from her. Explain what? That you're a thief? That everything we have is stolen? He looked at me. Can you prove all this? I held up a flash drive. Everything is on here. Copies of the trust documents, the lawyer's emails, bank statements showing every withdrawal Helen made over 4 years. Roger takes the drive from me and walks to their home office without saying anything. Helen follows him, talking fast about how he needs to understand the full context. I stay in the kitchen because I want to see how this plays out. I can hear Roger's keyboard clicking, then silence, then more clicking. Helen keeps talking, but her voice gets quieter like she knows nothing she says matters anymore. Roger comes back 10 minutes later and his face looks completely different, like someone drained all the color out of it. He sets the flash drive on the counter between us and asks how much money we're actually talking about. His voice sounds flat and empty. Nothing like the confident real estate developer who answered the door earlier. Helen tries to take his hand, but he pulls away without looking at her, and I watch something break in her expression when he does that. She starts talking really fast about how she was going to tell him everything once his business was more established. How she just needed time to figure out the right way to explain. Roger cuts her off mid-sentence and turns to me, asking again how much money. I tell him the trust was worth $10 million 4 years ago, plus whatever it should have earned from investments over that time. He just stares at me for a second, then looks at Helen like he's never actually seen her before this moment. Roger goes completely quiet for almost a full minute, just standing there staring at Helen while she tries to explain herself. Then he asks about his business, the development project he's been so proud of, whether any of his success is actually real, or if it's all built on stolen money from a dead man's daughter. His voice cracks a little when he says it, and I almost feel bad for him. Helen starts crying and saying she did it for both of them, that his business needed startup money, and she knew the trust was just sitting there not being used. She says my father would have wanted to help Roger succeed, which makes me want to throw something because she has no idea what my father would have wanted. Roger stands up so fast his chair tips over backward and crashes onto their expensive tile floor. He tells Helen that's not love, that's theft, and he can't believe she made him an unwitting partner in robbing her own daughter. Helen reaches for him again, but he steps back like her touch might burn him. I pull up the lawyer's emails on the tablet and show Roger the paper trail, scrolling through messages that detail every withdrawal Helen made to find his business venture's initial investment. He takes the tablet from me with shaking hands and reads through the emails, his jaw getting tighter with each one. I watch him realize that everything he built, everything he thought he accomplished on his own, started with money stolen from a grieving college kid working 3 jobs. Helen is full-on sobbing now, saying she did it because she loved him, because she wanted to give them both a good life after everything she went through with my father. Roger asks what she went through, since apparently my father left her extremely well provided for through my trust fund that she hijacked. Helen says she sacrificed her whole life for my father's business, and she deserved something for herself. Roger tells her she got something for herself. She got $10 million that wasn't hers to take. He says he thought they were building a life together, but she was just spending a dead man's money and lying about where it came from. I tell them both I'm contacting my father's lawyer today and taking back everything that's mine, every single thing Helen bought with my money. Helen begs me to wait, to let her explain everything properly, to give her a chance to make this right. I tell her she had 4 years to make it right, and instead she watched me struggle through college working myself to exhaustion while she took vacations and bought luxury cars. She says she sent me money sometimes, like those occasional $100 bills somehow make up for stealing millions. Roger asks me what I need from him, and his willingness to help surprises me until I realize he's probably scared about criminal charges. I tell him I want access to all financial records showing where my money went, every bank statement and business document that traces the stolen funds. He agrees immediately, saying he'll cooperate fully with whatever investigation happens because he wants to prove he didn't know about any of this. Helen accuses him of abandoning her, of choosing my side over hers after everything they've been through together. Roger tells her she abandoned her own daughter and made him part of it, that she lied to him every single day for 4 years about where their money came from. The fight that breaks out between them is ugly and loud, with Helen screaming that he never asked questions because he liked the lifestyle too much, and Roger yelling back that he trusted her to tell him the truth. I just stand there watching my mother's perfect life fall apart piece by piece. She's crying and screaming and grabbing at Roger while he keeps stepping away from her, and I feel nothing watching it happen. Maybe that makes me cold, but I can't find any sympathy for her right now. I leave while they're still fighting, walking out their front door and hearing Roger call after me asking for the lawyer's contact information. He says he wants to separate his legitimate business assets from the stolen funds, wants to figure out what's actually his and what came from my trust. Helen is still crying on their white leather couch, mascara running down her face, but I don't look back because I can't afford to feel sorry for her. If I let myself feel anything for her right now, I might lose my nerve about taking everything back. I get to my car and just sit there with my hands on the steering wheel for 20 minutes before I can even start the engine. My hands won't stop shaking as I realize I just blew up my mother's entire life, destroyed her relationship, and took away her security. Some part of me that still loves her feels guilty even though I know I shouldn't. She stole from me for 4 years, lied to my face while I worked 3 jobs, let me believe I had nothing while she spent my inheritance on beach houses and designer clothes. But she's still my mother, and I grew up loving her and trusting her, and it's hard to just turn that off completely. I start the car and drive away before I can change my mind about any of this. I punch the address from the emails into my phone and start driving toward downtown. The office building is 40 minutes away, and I spend the whole drive gripping the steering wheel too tight and trying not to think about Helen's face when Roger stepped away from her. Traffic is bad, and I keep hitting red lights, which gives me too much time to second-guess everything. My phone buzzes twice with calls from Helen's number, but I don't answer because there's nothing she can say that will change what she did. The office building is one of those modern glass towers in the financial district, and I have to circle 3 times before finding parking in an expensive garage. I take the elevator to the 7th floor where a brass plaque reads, Eaton and Associates Legal Services. The receptionist is young, maybe my age, and she looks up from her computer when I walk in. I tell her my name is Grace and I need to see Paisley Eaton about my father's trust fund. She gets this confused expression and asks if I have an appointment. I say no, but this is urgent, and it's about my father who died 4 years ago. Her eyes go wide suddenly like she just recognized my name, and she picks up her phone immediately. She tells someone on the other end that Grace is here and it's urgent, and she sounds almost scared. Less than 2 minutes later, a door opens and a woman in her 50s rushes out. She's wearing a gray suit and her eyes are actually wet like she might cry when she sees me. She stops a few feet away and just stares at me for a second before saying my name like a question. I nod and she comes forward and takes both my hands in hers. Paisley tells me she's been trying to reach me for over 2 years, and she was terrified something had happened to me. She says she promised my father she would take care of me, and not being able to find me has been awful. I feel my throat get tight because this stranger cared more about keeping my father's promises than my own mother did. Paisley leads me back to her office, which has dark wood furniture and windows overlooking the city. She closes the door and asks me to sit down and tell her everything. I pull out the tablet and show her all the emails from my father and from her trying to reach me. She reads through them and her face changes from relief to something harder and angrier. I explain how Helen changed my contact information in the files to her own email addresses, so every message bounced to her instead of me. Paisley's hands are shaking as she scrolls through the evidence of Helen's deception. She tells me this is worse than she thought because Helen didn't just steal money. She actively prevented me from learning about the trust and claiming what was mine. She says my father trusted Helen to take care of me until I turned 21, and Helen used that trust to rob me. Paisley pulls up files on her computer and shows me account statements. She explains that as trustee, Helen had limited power to use funds for my direct benefit like education and living expenses until I turned 21. Everything she spent on herself and Roger was completely illegal. The numbers on the screen make me dizzy. Paisley points to the current balance, which shows $3 million. She tells me the trust should be worth $12 million by now, with the original $10 million plus investment returns over 4 years. I feel sick realizing $7 million is just gone. Paisley sees my face and quickly says we can recover a lot of it through legal action. She explains that the beach house and cars are physical assets we can seize and sell. Roger's business investment might be recoverable depending on how it was structured. But some of the money Helen spent on trips and experiences and things that don't hold value is effectively lost forever. I ask how much we can realistically get back, and Paisley says probably $4 to $5 million in assets, plus we can get judgments against Helen for the rest. She tells me Helen will be paying this back for the rest of her life one way or another. Paisley picks up her phone and calls someone asking if they can come to her office right now for an emergency case. 20 minutes later, another woman walks in, who Paisley introduces as her partner, Regina. Regina looks younger than Paisley, maybe early 40s, with sharp eyes that take in everything. She sits down across from me and asks me to explain the situation from the beginning. I go through the whole story again while Regina takes notes on a legal pad. She asks specific questions about what assets Helen and Roger currently own that were purchased with my money. I list the beach house, 2 Tesla cars, and Roger's real estate development project that Helen funded. Regina nods and writes everything down. She tells me we have several legal options. We can file civil suits to recover the misappropriated funds and force the sale of assets purchased with trust money. We can pursue criminal charges for embezzlement and theft. We can freeze Helen's accounts and put liens on everything she owns. Regina looks at me directly and says this will completely destroy whatever relationship I have left with my mother. I tell her that relationship died the day Helen decided to steal from me and watch me struggle. Regina smiles slightly and says that's the right attitude because we need to be aggressive about this. Paisley, Regina, and I spend the next 3 hours going through every single email and withdrawal record. We build a timeline of Helen's theft starting 3 months after my father died when she sold his business. Regina makes notes about each major purchase and withdrawal with dates and amounts. Paisley keeps apologizing for not finding me sooner, and I have to tell her multiple times this isn't her fault. I explain how Helen deliberately hid me by changing my contact information and probably intercepting any mail that came to the house before she sold it. Regina asks if I have any proof of Helen changing my contact info, and I show her emails where the lawyer's messages bounced back from addresses I never created. She says that's perfect evidence of intentional deception. Paisley suggests we hire a forensic accountant to trace exactly where every dollar went. She says it will strengthen our case and help us identify all recoverable assets. She recommends someone named Trent Kozlov, who she's worked with before on complicated financial cases. Regina agrees and says Trent is excellent at following money trails even when people try to hide transactions. She tells me Trent's analysis will probably take a few weeks, but it will be worth it. By the time we finish, it's almost 6 in the evening and I'm exhausted. Paisley walks me to the elevator and tells me she's going to fix this and make sure I get back what my father left me. She gives me her personal cell number and says to call anytime, day or night, if I need anything. I drive back to my tiny apartment in a daze. The place looks even smaller and more depressing after spending the day in that nice law office. I drop my bag by the door and just sink down onto the floor in my living room. Everything hits me at once and I start crying. My mother looked me in the eye for 4 years while I worked myself to exhaustion. She watched me stress about money and skip meals to save on groceries. She saw me come home tired from working 3 jobs, and she felt nothing. The whole time she was spending my inheritance on beach houses and designer clothes and trips to Cabo. She let me believe I had nothing while she lived in luxury on money my father left specifically for me. I cry until my throat hurts and my eyes are swollen. The apartment is dark now and I'm still sitting on the floor, but I can't seem to get up. The next morning, I force myself off the floor and get ready for my meeting with Trent Kozlov at his office across town. Paisley set up the appointment and told me Trent was the best forensic accountant she knew for complicated money cases. His office is in a plain building with worn carpet and fluorescent lights that buzz overhead. Trent meets me in the lobby, and he's younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with dark hair and sharp eyes that seem to calculate everything they see. He shakes my hand and leads me to a small conference room filled with filing cabinets and stacks of folders. I hand him the flash drive with all the documentation from my father's lawyer, plus the records Regina compiled yesterday. Trent plugs it into his laptop and starts clicking through files without saying much. He pulls up spreadsheets and bank statements, his fingers moving fast across the keyboard like he's solving a puzzle only he can see. After about 10 minutes, he looks up and tells me he'll need to trace every transaction from the trust accounts to see where the money actually went. He explains his process involves matching withdrawals to purchases, tracking fund transfers between accounts, and identifying any attempts to hide spending patterns. He says it will take about 2 weeks to build a complete picture, because Helen made a lot of transactions, and some of them look deliberately complicated. I ask him how much this is going to cost, and he quotes me a number that makes me wince, but Paisley already told me it's necessary. Trent notices my reaction and says we can recover his fees as part of the lawsuit damages. He asks me questions about Helen's lifestyle, what kind of things she bought, where she traveled, anything I remember that might help him identify spending patterns. I tell him about the Instagram posts showing trips to Cabo and Aspen, the matching Teslas, the beach house, and Roger's real estate development. Trent writes everything down in a notebook with small, neat handwriting. He tells me he'll start with the big purchases since those are easiest to trace, then work backward to identify smaller spending. I leave his office feeling like at least someone is taking this seriously and treating it like the crime it actually is. Roger calls me that same afternoon while I'm driving home. I almost don't answer, but something makes me pick up. He asks if we can meet, and I'm immediately suspicious because why would he want to see me again? I tell him I don't think that's a good idea, and he says he has information I need, financial records from his business. We agree to meet at a coffee shop halfway between our locations, somewhere public and neutral. I get there first and order water because my stomach is too twisted to handle caffeine. Roger walks in 20 minutes later looking terrible. His eyes are red and puffy like he's been crying. His shirt is wrinkled and he hasn't shaved. He sits down across from me and immediately slides a thick folder across the table. Inside are bank statements, investment records, and business documents all organized with sticky notes and highlighting. He tells me these are all the financial records from his business that might involve my trust fund money. Every transaction Helen helped fund, every investment she made in his company, it's all documented here. I flip through the pages and see hundreds of thousands of dollars moving from accounts I recognize as mine into Roger's business ventures. He watches me read through everything, and his hands are shaking slightly as he holds his coffee cup. Roger tells me he's moving out of the beach house today. He says he already packed his things this morning and he's ending his relationship with Helen completely. He can't be with someone who would steal from their own child and watch them struggle for years. His voice cracks a little when he says this, and I wonder if he actually loved Helen or just loved the lifestyle my money provided. Part of me feels bad for him because he seems genuinely destroyed by all this, but another part of me is still angry because he benefited from my stolen inheritance even if he didn't know where it came from. I ask him directly if he ever suspected the money wasn't really from a divorce settlement. Roger looks down at his coffee and admits there were moments when things didn't add up. Helen's stories about her ex-husband changed sometimes, and the amounts she had access to seemed too large for a normal divorce. But he didn't push her on it because he didn't want to rock the boat. He says he was selfish and scared of losing her, so he ignored the red flags. Hearing him admit this makes me even angrier because his willful ignorance enabled my mother's theft for 4 years. If he'd asked harder questions or demanded proof, maybe I would have found out sooner. Maybe I wouldn't have worked 3 jobs and skipped meals and stressed about every dollar. Roger seems to sense my anger because he starts apologizing, saying he knows sorry doesn't fix anything, but he wishes he'd been braver. Roger offers to testify about everything he knows regarding how Helen spent the money. He says he'll cooperate fully with Trent's investigation and with any legal proceedings. He'll answer questions, provide documents, whatever I need to get my money back. I tell him I'll think about it, but right now I don't trust anyone who is close to my mother. He nods like he expected that answer and says he understands. We sit in uncomfortable silence for a minute before he asks if there's anything else he can do. I tell him the best thing he can do is stay away from Helen and let the legal process happen. Roger agrees and stands up to leave. He pauses at the table and tells me my father would be proud of how I'm handling this. I don't respond because I'm not sure if that's true, or if Roger even knew my father well enough to say that. 2 days pass and I'm trying to focus on normal life, but everything feels wrong. I go to my coffee shop job and stock shelves at the grocery store, but my mind is somewhere else. Paisley calls me on Thursday afternoon and says Helen's lawyer contacted her wanting to discuss a settlement. This means Helen knows she's in serious legal trouble and wants to avoid court. Paisley asks what I want to do, and I tell her I'm not interested in any settlement. I want everything back, and I want my mother to face real consequences for what she did. Paisley says she'll communicate that to Helen's lawyer and warns me they'll probably try to pressure us with sob stories about Helen's situation. I tell her I don't care about Helen's situation because she didn't care about mine for 4 years. Trent starts sending me preliminary reports a few days into his investigation. The first email contains a spreadsheet showing purchases I never knew about. Helen bought a luxury car 2 years ago, totaled it in an accident, and replaced it with another one using my money. Roger bought a boat 6 months after they started dating and sold it 6 months later, losing money on the deal. There are regular cash withdrawals totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars with no clear destination. Trent notes these in red on his spreadsheet with question marks because he can't trace where that cash went. Each new discovery makes me angrier. I'm reading about boats and luxury cars and cash withdrawals while I remember eating ramen noodles for weeks straight to save grocery money. I remember wearing the same 3 outfits to work because I couldn't afford new clothes. I remember calculating every single dollar and stressing about making rent. Helen was pulling out thousands in cash for who knows what while I was counting quarters for laundry. Helen starts calling me constantly. My phone rings 5 or 6 times a day with her number. I never answer. She leaves voicemails that I delete without listening. Then she switches to texting long messages about how depressed she was after Dad died and how she made mistakes she regrets. She says she never meant to hurt me and she always planned to make things right. She texts that she's my mother and she loves me and we should talk about this as a family. I read the first few messages and feel nothing except disgust. The woman who texted me $100 here and there while spending millions is now playing the victim. I block her number because her excuses mean absolutely nothing when I remember skipping meals to save money while she was buying designer handbags and booking trips to Cabo. Regina files the civil lawsuit the following week. Paisley calls to tell me it's officially filed with the court, seeking return of all stolen funds plus damages for the lost investment returns my trust should have earned. Regina also sent the case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. She warns me the criminal case is less certain because proving Helen's intent to permanently take my money can be complicated in family situations. Prosecutors sometimes hesitate to charge parents who claim they were using money for family purposes, even when it's clearly theft. But the civil case is solid and we should win that easily. I tell Paisley I understand, and I'm prepared for the possibility that Helen might not face criminal charges. At least the lawsuit will force her to give everything back. The lawsuit becomes real when Helen gets served with papers at the beach house. The process server shows up at her door and hands her the legal documents. Suddenly, Helen's lawyer is calling Paisley every single day trying to negotiate. Her lawyer argues that Helen believes she was entitled to use trust funds for family expenses and didn't understand the limits of her authority. Regina destroys that argument by showing the trust documents explicitly state Helen could only use funds for my direct benefit until I turned 21. After that, everything was supposed to transfer to me. There's no gray area and no room for misunderstanding. Helen knew exactly what she was doing when she bought herself a beach house and funded Roger's business with my inheritance. Trent calls me 3 days later asking if I can come to his office to review the final forensic report. I drive over that afternoon and he spreads out printed spreadsheets across his conference table showing every single transaction Helen made with my money. The numbers are worse than I imagined. $7 million gone in 4 years. He walks me through categories he created showing luxury purchases totaling $1.2 million, travel expenses at $800,000, cash withdrawals with no documentation at $600,000, and Roger's business investment at $900,000. The beach house cost $1.9 million, 2 Tesla vehicles at $140,000 combined, regular living expenses that averaged $15,000 per month, when a reasonable interpretation of trustee authority would have been maybe $3,000 monthly for legitimate administrative costs. Trent taps a highlighted section showing he identified $4 million in recoverable assets. The beach house, both vehicles, Roger's business stake, which he values at approximately $1 million based on the company's current performance, and some jewelry and artwork Helen purchased that we can trace and reclaim. The rest is just gone. Spent on experiences, depreciated items, or that mysterious cash that disappeared into whatever Helen was doing with it. I sit there staring at the spreadsheets feeling sick, because each line item represents something I could have had. The study abroad program I skipped because I couldn't afford it. The unpaid internship I couldn't take because I needed paying work. The countless nights I went to bed hungry because I was saving money for textbooks. Trent prints me copies of everything and puts together a summary report for Regina to use in court. He tells me this is one of the clearest cases of trustee theft he's seen because Helen made almost no effort to hide what she was doing. She just spent freely like the money was hers, which legally, it absolutely was not. Regina arranges a meeting with the district attorney the following week to discuss potential criminal charges. The DA is a woman in her 50s who looks tired and skeptical when we walk into her office. She reviews Trent's forensic report while we sit there, flipping through pages and making notes. Finally, she looks up and tells me they're considering embezzlement charges, but I need to understand that family theft cases are complicated. Juries can be sympathetic to parents even when the evidence is clear. She's seen cases where adult children won civil judgments, but criminal prosecutions failed because juries couldn't bring themselves to send a mother to prison for taking money they felt she had some claim to. The DA says the amounts involved here are substantial enough that they're taking it seriously, but she's being honest with me that criminal prosecution is a gamble. The civil case is almost certainly going to succeed in recovering assets because the evidence is overwhelming and the trust documents are crystal clear about Helen's limited authority. But criminal charges require proving Helen intended to permanently deprive me of the funds, and defense attorneys are good at arguing that parents believed they were entitled to use money for family purposes. I tell the DA I understand the risks, but I want them to file charges anyway because what Helen did wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate theft. She nods and says they'll make a decision within 2 weeks after reviewing everything thoroughly. Paisley calls me the next day saying Roger's business partner Bradley Ford contacted her wanting to talk. Bradley apparently just found out where Roger's initial investment money actually came from, and he's angry about being unknowingly involved in this situation. He wants to separate the legitimate business operations from the tainted initial investment and protect the company's reputation. Paisley asks if I'm willing to meet with him, and I agree because getting Roger's business stake liquidated would give us actual cash to return to my trust, instead of fighting over a complicated business dissolution. We arrange a meeting at Paisley's office for later that week. Bradley shows up with his own lawyer and brings detailed business records showing exactly how Roger's initial investment was used. He's a tall man in his 40s who looks genuinely upset about the whole situation. His lawyer spreads out financial documents showing the company's current valuation and how Roger's stake has grown over the past 3 years. Bradley tells us he built this company from nothing, and he's not going to let it be destroyed because Roger's girlfriend stole from her own daughter. He offers to buy out Roger's entire stake at fair market value, which his lawyer calculates at approximately $1.1 million, based on current assets and projected earnings. The buyout would give us liquid funds immediately, instead of forcing a complicated dissolution that would hurt the business and might recover less money. Regina reviews the offer carefully and tells me it's actually generous. Bradley could probably negotiate lower given the circumstances, but he seems more interested in cleanly separating from Roger than in saving money. I sit through this business meeting at 23 years old, trying to understand corporate valuations and asset transfers. Bradley's lawyer is explaining things about equity stakes and buyout terms, using words I barely understand. I'm doing math in my head trying to figure out if the offer is fair, trying to understand concepts I should have learned in the college finance classes I couldn't afford to take because I was too busy working 3 jobs. The irony isn't lost on me that I'm finally learning about money management and business operations while recovering my stolen inheritance. I should have learned this stuff in a classroom with my father's money paying for my education like he intended. Instead, I'm getting a crash course in corporate finance because my mother decided to fund her boyfriend's dreams with my trust fund. Bradley notices me struggling with some of the terminology, and actually takes time to explain things more simply. He draws diagrams showing how business equity works and why his valuation is reasonable. I appreciate that he's treating me like a real person, instead of just an obstacle to his business protection. By the end of the meeting, I understand enough to know his offer is fair, and probably the best way to get liquid assets back quickly. Helen's lawyer contacts Regina 2 days later proposing a settlement. The offer is that Helen keeps the beach house but returns everything else, including the vehicles, and agrees to make payments over time for the unrecoverable amounts. Regina calls me immediately to discuss it, and her advice is clear. Reject it. Helen has proven over 4 years that she can't be trusted to make payments or keep agreements. She'll promise anything to keep the beach house and then default on payments the moment she thinks she can get away with it. Regina points out the beach house alone is worth nearly $2 million, and it's one of the few major assets we can actually recover in full. Giving Helen the most valuable asset while hoping she'll pay us back over time is exactly the kind of deal that benefits her and screws me. I tell Regina to reject the settlement, and she sounds satisfied with my decision. She says she'll prepare a counteroffer that demands everything, including the beach house. Regina sends the counteroffer the next day demanding the beach house, all vehicles, Roger's business stake through Bradley's buyout, and a judgment for the remaining unrecoverable funds secured by a lien on any future assets Helen might acquire. Basically, we're taking everything we can identify and get our hands on, plus putting a legal claim on anything Helen might earn or inherit in the future until the full amount is repaid. Helen's lawyer calls back within hours saying she'll never agree to lose the house. Regina tells me about the call, and I tell her that's exactly why we're taking it. The beach house represents everything Helen stole from me. She bought her dream house with my money while I was living in a studio apartment eating ramen. She doesn't get to keep the symbol of her theft just because she likes the ocean view. Regina sounds almost pleased when she tells me she'll inform Helen's lawyer that we're not negotiating on the house. The stress of the legal battle starts affecting my health within a few weeks. I'm having trouble sleeping, lying awake at night thinking about depositions and court dates and what Helen might say to try to keep her stolen assets. I'm constantly anxious, checking my phone every few minutes to see if Regina or Paisley called with updates. My stomach hurts most days, and I've lost weight because I'm too nervous to eat properly. The physical toll surprises me because I thought I was handling everything okay, but my body is keeping score even when my mind tries to push through. Paisley notices during one of our meetings when I'm drinking my 3rd coffee and looking exhausted. She gently suggests I talk to someone, recommending a therapist who specializes in family financial abuse. I'm resistant at first because therapy feels like admitting I can't handle this, but Paisley explains that what Helen did isn't just financial theft, it's emotional betrayal that would mess up anyone. She gives me the therapist's contact information, and I promise to think about it. I call the therapist 2 days later after another sleepless night. Her name is Dr. Sarah Shaw, and she has an opening the following week. The first session is awkward because I don't really know how to explain that I'm suing my mother for stealing my inheritance. But Dr. Shaw listens without judgment and then tells me something that hits hard. She says grieving my mother while she's still alive is a real and valid experience. The mother I thought I had, the one who cried with me about Dad's death and struggled alongside me, that person never actually existed. I'm mourning the loss of an illusion while dealing with the reality of who Helen truly is. Dr. Shaw explains that this kind of grief is complicated because there's no closure, no funeral, no clear endpoint. Helen is still out there making excuses and trying to negotiate, so I can't fully process the loss because the situation keeps changing. She helps me understand that it's okay to be angry and sad and confused all at the same time, that I don't have to forgive Helen or maintain a relationship just because she's my mother, that protecting myself from people who hurt me isn't cruel even when they're family. Trent calls me 3 weeks into therapy with another discovery. He found records showing Helen took out a home equity line of credit on my father's house before selling it. She borrowed $200,000 against the house value, pocketed that money separately from the sale proceeds, and I never knew it existed. This additional theft adds another $200,000 to the amount she stole. Trent sounds angry on the phone, which is unusual for him because he's normally very calm and professional. He tells me Helen was systematic about stealing from me, that she found every possible way to extract money from my trust and my father's estate. Regina immediately amends our lawsuit to include the home equity line theft. She tells me this actually strengthens our case because it shows Helen's theft was planned and deliberate, not some confused misunderstanding of her trustee authority. Helen knew exactly what she was doing when she mortgaged my father's house and kept the money for herself. Regina schedules Helen's deposition for 3 weeks later in a conference room at her law office. I arrive early and sit in a chair against the wall while Regina sets up her documents and recording equipment. Helen walks in with her lawyer looking tired and older than I remember, wearing a plain black suit instead of her usual designer clothes. The court reporter sets up her machine and everyone takes their seats around the long table. Regina starts with basic questions about Helen's role as trustee and her understanding of the trust terms. Helen answers carefully, claiming she thought she had broad authority to use funds for family purposes. Regina pulls out the trust document and reads the exact language limiting her authority to my direct benefit only. Helen shifts in her seat and says she interpreted that differently. Regina asks about the beach house purchase, and Helen says she believed providing a stable home environment for family gatherings benefited me. Regina shows Helen the property records proving I was never listed as an occupant, and asks how a house I never lived in benefited me directly. Helen stumbles through an answer about future visits and family unity. Regina moves to the luxury cars, and Helen claims they were for transportation to visit me at college. Regina produces my phone records showing Helen visited me exactly twice in 4 years. Helen's face gets red and she says the records must be incomplete. Regina asks about the $200,000 home equity line on my father's house. Helen claims she needed it for estate taxes. Regina shows her the life insurance payout that covered all taxes and asks where that $200,000 actually went. Helen says she doesn't remember the specific expenses. Regina pulls out bank statements showing cash withdrawals and transfers to personal accounts. Helen starts talking faster, saying there were many legitimate costs associated with managing the estate. Regina asks her to name 3 specific legitimate costs that required $200,000 in cash. Helen can't answer. She looks at her lawyer, who tells her she doesn't have to speculate about specific expenses. Regina asks about Roger's business investment and whether Helen told him the money came from my trust. Helen says she told Roger it was her divorce settlement. Regina asks if Helen understands that lying to her boyfriend about stolen money doesn't make the theft legal. Helen's lawyer objects, but Regina has already made her point. I watch Helen squirm in her chair trying to explain away 4 years of deliberate theft. Regina shows her email after email from Paisley trying to contact me about the trust transfer. Helen claims she never saw those emails. Regina proves Helen changed my contact information in the lawyer's files to her own dummy email addresses. Helen says she must have made a mistake updating the information. Regina asks if Helen made that same mistake 15 separate times across multiple documents. Helen's composure cracks and she starts crying, saying she was overwhelmed after my father's death and not thinking clearly. Regina lets the tears sit in silence for a full minute before asking if Helen was too overwhelmed to go to Cabo 3 times or buy a Tesla. The deposition continues for 4 hours, and by the end, Helen has contradicted herself so many times her own lawyer looks defeated. Regina thanks everyone for their time, and I follow her out of the conference room feeling a grim satisfaction at watching my mother's lies fall apart under questioning. I head toward the bathroom during the break, and Helen catches me in the hallway. She starts walking toward me with her hands out like she wants to hug me, but Paisley appears from nowhere and steps between us. Helen's eyes are red from crying, and she tells me through fresh tears that she's still my mother and she loves me. The words sound hollow after 4 hours of watching her lie under oath. I look at her standing there in her bargain suit trying to play the victim, and something cold settles in my chest. I tell her that real mothers don't steal their children's futures for beach houses and boyfriends. Helen flinches like I slapped her. She tries to say she made mistakes but never stopped loving me. I tell her love is more than words. It's actions, and her actions showed me exactly how much I mattered to her. Paisley gently touches my arm and suggests we go back to the conference room. Helen calls after me saying we're family, and family forgives each other. I don't turn around because I'm done listening to her excuses. Paisley walks with me down the hallway and doesn't say anything, just stays close in case I need support. We get back to the conference room and I sit down feeling exhausted but also clearer than I have in weeks. Helen's lawyer approaches Regina and asks if we can discuss settlement options. Regina tells him to put any offers in writing. The deposition ends and I drive home replaying Helen's testimony in my mind. How easily she lied until Regina confronted her with proof. 2 weeks later, Regina calls saying the judge ordered mediation before trial. I have to sit across a table from Helen while a mediator tries to find common ground. The mediation happens in a neutral office with bland artwork and uncomfortable chairs. Helen arrives with her lawyer and won't make eye contact with me. The mediator explains the process and asks both sides to share their perspectives. Helen's lawyer talks about her emotional state after my father's death and her confused understanding of trustee duties. Regina counters with the timeline of deliberate theft and concealment. The mediator asks Helen directly what she's willing to offer to resolve this. Helen looks up at me for the first time and says she'll pay everything back if I just give her time. She promises she's changed and realizes what she did was wrong. Regina asks how much time Helen needs considering she's had 4 years and only spent more. Helen says she needs to sell some assets and arrange financing. Regina points out that all Helen's assets were purchased with my stolen money, so selling them to pay me back isn't generosity. The mediator suggests we focus on realistic solutions. Helen keeps saying she'll make it right if I give her a chance. I stay quiet and let Regina handle the negotiation. Helen's lawyer proposes a payment plan over 10 years. Regina says absolutely not because Helen has proven she can't be trusted with long-term commitments. The mediation goes in circles for 2 hours with Helen promising to pay and Regina demanding immediate asset surrender. The mediator calls for a private session with just Helen and her lawyer. When they come back, Helen looks different, smaller somehow. She starts talking and her voice shakes. She says she needs to be honest about why she did it. Helen tells me she was jealous of me. She says my father left everything to me and she felt like he loved me more than her. The words hang in the air and nobody moves. Helen keeps going, saying she spent 20 years married to my father, building his business and raising his daughter, and then he died and gave it all to me. She felt erased, like her contributions meant nothing. She says watching me struggle through college while sitting on millions felt like justice for how overlooked she felt. The raw honesty is shocking and horrible. I realize my mother's theft wasn't just about money but about resentment she held toward her own daughter. Helen says she knows it's sick and wrong, but she couldn't help feeling like I stole her life. I sit there processing that my mother hated me for being loved by my father. The mediator asks if this honesty can help us move forward. Regina looks at me and I can see she's as disturbed as I am by Helen's confession. Helen's jealousy of her own child explains everything but excuses nothing. I think about all the times she watched me work myself to exhaustion and realize she enjoyed it because in her twisted mind, I deserved to suffer for being my father's favorite. The mediator tries to use Helen's confession as a breakthrough moment. He suggests Helen keep a small condo if she surrenders everything else and agrees to a structured payment plan for unrecoverable funds. Helen looks hopeful, like she thinks her honesty earned her something. I tell the mediator no. Regina asks if I'm sure, and I say absolutely. I explain that Helen's jealousy and resentment don't excuse 4 years of watching me struggle. Her confession just proved she knew exactly what she was doing and did it anyway because she wanted me to suffer. The mediator says we all have complex emotions and family dynamics. I tell him my mother's complex emotions led her to systematically steal my inheritance while I worked 3 jobs. Helen's face changes and she starts yelling that I'm vindictive and cruel. She says I have a chance to show mercy and I'm choosing revenge instead. I stay calm and tell her this isn't revenge, it's consequences. She screams that I'm just like my father, cold and selfish. Her lawyer tries to quiet her down but she keeps going. She says my father ruined her life by dying and leaving her with nothing while I got everything. She says I'm finishing what he started by destroying her completely. Regina stands up and announces we're done here. The mediator tries to salvage something, but Regina tells him there's nothing to salvage when one party is screaming abuse at the other. Helen's lawyer apologizes and tries to get Helen to stop talking. We leave the mediation with nothing resolved, and Helen's voice still echoing down the hallway calling me names. Regina calls me that evening and says we're going to trial. She tells me she's confident we'll win everything we're asking for, but trials are unpredictable, and I need to prepare for the possibility of a judge showing Helen some leniency. Some judges get sympathetic toward parents even when the evidence is clear. I tell Regina I understand, but I'm not backing down. She asks if I'm sure because trial will be expensive and emotionally draining. I tell her this isn't just about money anymore. It's about accountability. Helen needs to face real consequences for what she did, not just promises to pay me back someday. Regina says she'll file the trial brief next week and we should prepare for a court date in about 3 months. She warns me Helen's lawyer will try to paint me as a vindictive daughter punishing her grieving mother. I tell Regina to let them try because the evidence speaks for itself. We talk strategy for an hour and I feel ready for whatever comes next. Helen made her choices and now she gets to live with the results. 2 weeks before trial, Regina calls with unexpected news. The district attorney decides to file criminal charges after all. Trent's forensic analysis proves Helen deliberately concealed her actions, and the amounts involved are substantial enough for criminal prosecution. Regina explains Helen now faces both the civil suit and potential jail time. The criminal charges change everything because suddenly Helen is looking at real prison time, not just losing assets. Regina says Helen's lawyer will probably panic and try to settle immediately. I ask what happens if Helen goes to prison, and Regina says it depends on the judge, but embezzlement of this amount typically carries 2 to 5 years. I sit with that information trying to figure out how I feel about my mother potentially going to prison. Part of me wants her to face the maximum consequences. Another part remembers she's still the person who raised me, even if she betrayed me. Regina tells me to think about what outcome I actually want, because once we get to trial, I'll have less control over what happens. Helen's lawyer contacts Regina the next morning in a complete panic, wanting to settle immediately. The new offer includes surrendering all assets, a judgment for remaining funds, and Helen's cooperation in the criminal case. In exchange, Helen wants Regina to support a recommendation for probation instead of jail time. Regina brings me the offer and walks through what it means. I'd get the beach house, the cars, Roger's business stake, and a secured judgment for about $3 million in unrecoverable funds. Helen would plead guilty to the criminal charges but ask for probation with community service instead of prison time. Regina says if I support the probation recommendation, the judge will likely consider it because I'm the victim. She asks what I want to do. I tell her I need time to think about it. Regina says Helen's lawyer needs an answer within 48 hours because trial prep deadlines are approaching. I spend 2 days wrestling with the decision. Part of me wants to see Helen face prison for what she did. She deserves to lose her freedom like she tried to take mine. But another part of me knows sending my mother to prison won't undo the past 4 years. I call my therapist for an emergency session to talk through it. My therapist listens to everything and then asks me what I need to heal. I tell her I need Helen to face consequences and admit what she did. She asks if I need Helen to go to prison specifically, or if other consequences might be enough. I realize I don't actually need Helen in prison. I just need her to lose everything she gained from stealing from me. My therapist helps me understand that my healing doesn't require Helen's maximum suffering. What I need is justice and acknowledgement, not revenge. She asks what would make me feel like justice was served. I tell her Helen losing all the assets she bought with my money, having a judgment against her for life, and having to admit in court exactly what she did. My therapist points out that all of those things are in the settlement offer. She asks if adding prison time to that would actually help me heal or just satisfy my anger. I sit with that question for a long time. Finally, I tell my therapist I'll agree to the settlement terms, including supporting probation, but only if Helen admits in court exactly what she did and apologizes publicly. Not some vague statement from her lawyer, but Helen standing before a judge and detailing every betrayal. My therapist says that sounds like a reasonable boundary that protects my needs while not requiring Helen's maximum suffering. I call Regina and tell her I'll accept the settlement with that condition added. Regina says she'll communicate that to Helen's lawyer and see if Helen agrees. The settlement hearing happens on a cold Tuesday morning in early November. I arrive at the courthouse with Regina and Paisley, and we go through security to the courtroom. Helen is already there with her lawyer looking small and defeated. The judge calls the case and asks if we've reached a settlement. Regina confirms and outlines the terms. The judge asks Helen if she understands she's giving up all assets and accepting a $3 million judgment. Helen says yes. The judge asks if she understands she's pleading guilty to embezzlement charges. Helen says yes again. Then the judge tells Helen that as part of the settlement, she needs to explain to the court exactly what she did. Helen stands up and her hands are shaking. She starts talking and her voice is barely above a whisper. She says she was the trustee of her daughter's $10 million trust fund, and instead of protecting it, she spent it on herself. She lists the beach house, the cars, funding her boyfriend's business, luxury vacations. She admits she changed my contact information to hide the theft from the lawyer trying to reach me. She says she watched me work 3 jobs and struggle through college while she spent my inheritance, and she did nothing to help me. She admits she lied about my father's business being in debt and the house being mortgaged. She says she stole my future because she was jealous that my father loved me. Her voice breaks and she starts crying. She looks at me directly and says she's sorry. She says she knows sorry isn't enough and nothing she can say will undo what she did. She says she was a terrible mother and she destroyed our relationship for money and resentment. The apology sounds genuine, but I feel nothing listening to it. Words can't undo 4 years of struggle and lies. The judge accepts Helen's statement and approves the settlement terms. Helen is sentenced to 5 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and monthly restitution payments. The judge signs the order transferring all assets to my control immediately. Regina hands me copies of all the paperwork and we leave the courthouse. Helen tries to catch my eye as we walk past, but I look straight ahead. Paisley puts her hand on my shoulder as we exit the building into the cold morning air. The paperwork gets filed that same afternoon, and Regina hands me copies of everything in a thick manila folder. The judge's order is official now and legally binding, which means Helen can't change her mind or try to fight it anymore. Paisley drives me back to her office and we spend 2 hours going through next steps for actually taking control of the assets. She explains that the beach house title transfer will take about 3 weeks to process through the county recorder's office, and the bank accounts need new signature cards and authorization forms. I sign so many documents my hand starts cramping, but each signature feels like taking back another piece of what Helen stole. Regina calls the bank manager directly and arranges for me to come in tomorrow morning to establish new accounts in my name only, separate from anything Helen ever touched. Paisley asks if I have somewhere safe to stay while everything processes, and I tell her I'm still in my studio apartment near campus. She looks concerned and offers to advance me some money from the Trust for Better Housing, but I shake my head because I need to see the actual money in my account before I can believe it's real. That night, I sit on my apartment floor with all the legal documents spread around me, reading through every page of the settlement agreement. Helen has to make monthly restitution payments of $2,000 for the next 125 months, which works out to just over 10 years of payments. The probation terms require her to meet with a probation officer monthly, complete 500 hours of community service at a nonprofit, and submit to random financial audits to make sure she's not hiding money. I try to imagine my mother picking up trash on the highway or serving food at a shelter, and the image feels impossible because Helen always cared so much about appearances and status. 3 weeks pass in a blur of paperwork and phone calls and meetings with Paisley about trust administration. The day finally comes when the title company calls to say the beach house deed is recorded in my name and I can take possession. Paisley offers to come with me, but I tell her I need to do this alone, so she just hands me the keys that were held in escrow. I drive to the beach house on a gray Tuesday morning when the fog is rolling in off the ocean. The gate code still works, and I pull into the circular driveway, parking in the same spot where I confronted Helen and Roger about the theft. The house looks different now, knowing it belongs to me instead of being another thing Helen stole. I unlock the front door and step inside, and the silence hits me immediately because the place feels completely empty. Roger moved out like he said he would, taking all his personal belongings and leaving behind only the furniture that came with the house. I walk through the marble kitchen where I showed Roger the tablet with all the emails, and my footsteps echo on the tile floor. The living room has the same expensive couch where Helen used to pose for Instagram photos, the same view of the ocean through floor-to-ceiling windows. I go upstairs and check the bedrooms, and Roger cleared out completely, even taking the clothes from the closets and the toiletries from the bathrooms. The master bedroom feels cold despite the expensive bedding, and I sit on the edge of the bed that Helen bought with my stolen money. Everything in this house was purchased with funds that should have paid for my college education, should have given me security and options instead of forcing me to work 3 jobs. I walk through every room cataloging what's here, and the realtor I hired is coming tomorrow to assess the property value for listing. The ocean view is beautiful through the windows, but I can't enjoy it because all I see is the cost of my mother's betrayal. I spend an hour just sitting in the empty house trying to feel something other than numb, but the anger and hurt have faded into this flat exhaustion. Helen lived here spending my inheritance while I struggled to pay rent on a studio apartment, and that fact should make me furious. But instead, I just feel tired. Paisley sets up a meeting the following week with a wealth management firm that specializes in trust administration. The new trustee is a serious woman in her 50s who explains her fiduciary duty to protect and grow the trust assets according to my father's wishes. We go through all the recovered assets, and Paisley has everything organized in detailed spreadsheets, showing where the money came from. The beach house is worth $2.1 million based on recent comparable sales in the area. The 2 cars Helen bought are worth about $90,000 combined after depreciation. Roger's business stake that Bradley is buying out will bring in $800,000. There are some bonds and investment accounts that Helen didn't completely drain, worth about $400,000. The cash in various bank accounts totals another $600,000 after legal fees and costs. Paisley adds everything up, and the total recovered value is approximately $6 million, which is less than the original $10 million trust, and way less than it should have grown to over 4 years. The trustee explains that with proper investment management, the $6 million can grow over time and eventually reach what it should have been. We create an investment plan that balances growth with security, and I sign more documents authorizing the trustee to manage everything according to the plan. Paisley smiles and tells me this is what my father wanted, for me to have professional management protecting my inheritance. The trustee asks about my current financial needs, and I admit I'm still living in a studio apartment and working part-time at the coffee shop, because I haven't fully processed that I don't need to anymore. She suggests I take a distribution to improve my living situation and pay off any debts, which makes sense but feels strange after years of having nothing. I decide to sell the beach house within a week of taking possession because I can't imagine living there. Every room reminds me of Helen's lies, and the 4 years I spent struggling while she lived in luxury. The realtor lists it for $2.2 million, and we get 3 offers within 5 days because the location is desirable. I accept an offer of $2.1 million from a family who seem excited about the ocean view, and the sale closes in 30 days. The money goes directly into the trust, and seeing that deposit makes the recovery feel real in a way the legal documents didn't. Each step of reclaiming my inheritance feels like taking back pieces of myself that Helen tried to steal, like I'm rebuilding my life from the foundation up. Paisley helps me understand the tax implications of the sale, and the trust structure protects most of the gains. I keep thinking about how my father set everything up to take care of me, how he planned ahead and created protections that Helen spent years trying to destroy. The beach house sale means I've recovered most of the physical assets Helen bought with my money, and now we're just waiting on Bradley's buyout of Roger's business stake. Bradley calls me directly a few weeks later to discuss the business buyout terms. He explains that Roger actually built something legitimate with the stolen initial investment, which surprises me because I assumed everything Roger touched was tainted. The development company has real projects and real revenue, and Bradley wants to separate the legitimate business from the illegal origins. He offers $800,000 for Roger's 40% stake, which is fair market value based on the company's current valuation. I agree to the terms, and Bradley sends the purchase agreement through his lawyer. The money transfers within 2 weeks and adds another $800,000 in liquid funds to the trust. Roger sends me a brief email after the buyout closes, just 2 sentences saying he's sorry for everything, and he hopes I can build a good life. I stare at the email for a long time trying to decide if I should respond. But finally I just delete it because Roger's apology doesn't change anything. He chose to ignore the red flags about Helen's money, chose not to ask hard questions because he liked the lifestyle, and that makes him complicit, even if he didn't know the full truth. The first thing I do with access to the trust funds is pay off my student loans in full. The total balance is $68,000 after 4 years of minimum payments that barely touch the principal. I log into the loan servicer website and make a single payment for the full amount, and watching the balance drop to zero makes me start crying. I spent 4 years working 3 jobs to make those monthly payments, skipped meals to save money, lived in a tiny apartment with broken heat because I couldn't afford better. All that struggle was unnecessary because my father left me money specifically for college expenses, money that Helen stole and spent on herself. Paisley meets me for coffee the next day, and I tell her about paying off the loans, and she smiles and says, "This is what my father wanted. He wanted me to start my adult life without financial burden, wanted me to have opportunities and choices instead of debt and stress." I think about how different my college experience could have been if Helen had been honest, if she'd used the trust money for my education like my father intended. I could have focused on learning instead of working, could have joined clubs and made friends instead of rushing between jobs. Helen didn't just steal money, she stole 4 years of my life and experiences I can never get back. 6 months after the settlement, I'm living in a modest but comfortable apartment in a better neighborhood. The place has heat that works and windows that close properly, and a kitchen with appliances that aren't 30 years old. I'm working part-time at a bookstore because I want something to do, not because I need the money, which is a strange feeling after years of desperate work. My therapist helps me work through complicated feelings about having money now when I spent so long having none. She explains that survivor's guilt is common for people who escape poverty or financial stress, this feeling that I don't deserve comfort when others are still struggling. I tell her about feeling guilty every time I buy something without checking my bank balance first, about how I still eat ramen sometimes even though I can afford real food. The therapist asks me to think about what my father would want for me, and I know he'd want me to be comfortable and secure and focused on building my future. She gives me homework to practice accepting my new financial reality, small things like buying nice coffee without guilt or replacing my worn-out shoes. It sounds simple, but after years of poverty mindset, spending money on myself feels wrong even when I know it shouldn't. Helen sends emails through her lawyer every month with updates on her restitution payments. I have Paisley handle them because I'm not ready for any direct contact with my mother. The emails apparently include details about her community service hours and probation check-ins, like Helen thinks I care about her compliance with the court order. Paisley summarizes the payments for me each month and confirms Helen is staying current on her obligations, which is the only thing that matters. My therapist says I may never be ready for direct contact with Helen, and that's okay. That protecting myself from people who hurt me isn't cruel even when they're family. She explains that forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation, that I can process what happened and move forward without ever speaking to Helen again. Some part of me thought I'd feel better once everything was resolved, once I got the money back and Helen faced consequences. But mostly I just feel empty where my relationship with my mother used to be. The therapist says that's grief, that I'm mourning the mother I thought I had, and accepting the reality of who Helen actually is. I enroll in graduate school to finish the education I had to rush through while working 3 jobs. The program is in business administration because I want to understand how to manage the inheritance my father left me, how to make sure I never end up vulnerable again. This time I can focus on actually learning instead of just surviving, can read the assigned materials instead of skimming them between work shifts. My father wanted me to have opportunities, and I'm finally able to pursue them the way he intended, without the constant stress of wondering how I'll pay rent. The other students in my program don't know my story, don't know I spent years working 3 jobs, or that my mother stole my inheritance. I'm just another graduate student trying to build a career, and the anonymity feels good after months of legal drama. My professors are smart and challenging, and I realize how much I missed during undergrad, when I was too exhausted to engage deeply with the material. I'm learning about investment strategies and financial planning and trust administration, all the things I wish I'd understood when Helen was stealing from me. Trent sends me a final report showing the trust is now worth $6.8 million after investments and recovered assets. The number is still short of what it should have been, probably missing 3 or 4 million that Helen spent and can never be recovered. But 6.8 million is substantial enough to change my life completely, to give me security and options my father wanted me to have. Trent includes a note saying my father would be proud of how I fought for myself, how I didn't let Helen's betrayal destroy my future. I read the note 3 times and start crying because I miss my father so much, miss having a parent who actually cared about my well-being. He spent years building his business specifically, so I would have a foundation to build my own life on, and Helen tried to destroy that gift out of jealousy and greed. The trust is growing now under proper management, earning returns that will compound over time. Paisley explains that if I'm careful and don't spend recklessly, the trust can support me for life, and even leave something for my own children someday. My father's gift survived Helen's theft, and my fight to recover it, and now I have the chance to use it the way he always intended. A year passes, and I find myself sitting on the floor of my new apartment with 3 graduate school acceptance letters spread out in front of me. The programs are good ones. Business administration at schools I couldn't have dreamed of affording when I was working 3 jobs and eating ramen every night. I pick up each letter and read it again, trying to make the decision feel real, and something shifts inside me that I haven't felt in so long I almost don't recognize it. Hope. Not the desperate kind I had during those years of struggling, but real solid hope about what comes next. The trust fund gives me choices and security, but sitting here looking at these letters, I realize the bigger gift is knowing I was strong enough to fight back when someone tried to destroy my future. I fold the letters carefully and put them in a folder labeled New Start, because that's what this feels like, a chance to build the life my father wanted me to have. Paisley calls the next week and asks if I want to have lunch, and I meet her at a small Italian place downtown, where she orders us both pasta and tells me she has stories to share. She starts talking about my father, about the years he spent building his business, and how every decision he made was thinking about my future. She says he used to talk about wanting to give me a foundation, something solid I could build my own dreams on without the weight of financial stress he'd carried in his early years. Her eyes get a little wet when she tells me how carefully he structured the trust, how he made sure it was protected from anyone who might try to take it. And I realize he somehow knew he needed to protect it even from my mother. Paisley reaches across the table and squeezes my hand, telling me he would be heartbroken about what Helen did, but so proud of how I handled everything with strength and dignity. I drive to the cemetery that afternoon, something I haven't done since before the lawsuit started because I couldn't face him while everything was falling apart. I find his grave under the oak tree and sit down on the grass next to the headstone, and for a long time I just sit there trying to figure out what to say. Finally, I tell him I got it all back, that I recovered what he left me and I'm going to use it the way he wanted. I thank him for planning ahead, for protecting me even after he was gone, for loving me enough to make sure I'd be okay. I promise him I'll make him proud, that I'll finish my education and build something good with the foundation he gave me, and I won't let Helen's betrayal define who I become. I'm enrolling in graduate school next semester and moving forward with my life in ways I couldn't have imagined 2 years ago when I was stocking grocery store shelves at midnight. Helen exists somewhere in my past, but she doesn't get to write my future anymore. That power is mine now. I have my inheritance back. I have my education ahead of me, and I finally have the real chance to become who I was always meant to be, before grief and lies tried to steal that from me.